I'm a political refugee from Romania, which not many people know about me, and so the foreign policy, international relations field has always interested me personally for my family's history. I wanted to make a difference. I didn't want to just, go out and student protests on this policy or that policy, and so I went to go work on the Hill for several years and really started to realize that a lot of what's behind policymaking and policy shaping is money. But I wanted to be on the good side of money, and so philanthropy was sort of the natural fit for me. When I was at Plowshares, I noticed that even though nuclear terrorism and nuclear security were being positioned as the top national security concerns globally, there was not a lot of coordination. Not many people kind of knew what was happening in the field or what this field was. There wasn't much action on Capitol Hill. And so one of the things, because I was at Plowshares and it was a very nimble foundation and organization, one of the things I was able to do was launch a coalition to address these concerns. And that's how the Fissile Materials Working Group was born. And the idea behind the FMWG was that by bringing together all the right players, having some funding behind them, and working with a communications component, we would be able to move the dial a little bit on this top national security concern. The reason why I'm still in the nonprofit sector in advocacy and philanthropy is that I think that's where you can make the biggest difference. I've worked in all of them before. The private sector, worked on Capitol Hill as well as in the executive branch. And in the nonprofit sector, you aren't hampered by your bureaucracy, you're not hampered by hierarchy. You have the flexibility to really own and put forward your ideas. And you are still working with those other sectors, but you just have more opportunity to really jump in and make a difference, just like with the Fissile Materials Working Group. I mean, it only took us 4 years, but the FMWG is now the go-to global network of experts on nuclear security terrorism. Every philanthropist, every foundation is very different, and so some funders have more constraints on them, but some of them do actually do advocacy, like the Plowshares Fund is both a grant maker and a advocacy organization all in one. And then there are others, like public foundations, where you can both give out the dollars, but then supplement and leverage that by doing things like bringing people together or doing some lobbying yourself, of course, as it's allowed by the law. But I think a lot of foundations don't use the full tools available to them. There are a ton of things that funders can do. They can meet with their member of Congress and say, hey, I'm investing X millions of dollars or $100,000, whatever, on this issue, and this is why I find it important. You can write an op-ed in your local paper. You can convene grantees and other stakeholders and experts around the issue on which you're funding. The financial crisis definitely impacted the philanthropic space. It was a couple years before the public financial crash, just because of the way the grant-making cycles worked. And the impact had a sort of waterfall effect on the grantees once the foundation's endowments were decimated, and some by 50%. We're not talking small change here, but tens of millions of dollars, even within one foundation. It had a huge impact. A lot of the funders needed to make some really tough calls. It hasn't been all that bad, though. I think it's good to sort of take a culling once in a while and really figure out what are the most strategic things that we could be funding, what are the most strategic grantees out there. There were certainly some mergers and acquisitions of grantees, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, maybe you shouldn't have dozens of grantees working on a very esoteric issue area. Things that funders and philanthropists are looking at now in the peace and security space, and in nuclear specifically, are innovation and local funding. And so by innovation, I mean just looking outside of our silos. So for example, if it's a nuclear silo, bringing in people who aren't nuclear experts, teachers or engineers or doctors, to help think on this global security challenge. That's one thing. So how can we do things differently? How can we take risks? How can we innovate to really try and crack some of these global challenges? That's the one thing. The second big theme and trend, I would say, is really local grant making. So instead of funding a massive multilateral, national organization, we are also looking at funding locally. And so what can we fund on the ground in Africa or Asia or wherever, or even in local cities here in the United States? So how can funders work more directly with their grantees? The relations with Russia have hampered the peace and security field, some. Although I have to say, I'm surprised a lot of people are saying, well, that's even more reason to try and work, perhaps not with the Russian officials or Russian government, but rather with civil society actors in Russia and try and figure out what are some options here. What can we be doing? We're not going to start a second Cold War. And so there's actually, I've been involved with some track 2 dialogues between American experts across different fields, industry, philanthropy, academia, engineering, just medical, a lot of different fields. And so, and with our Russian counterparts, just to keep the dialogue going. And so I think it's actually, and there's a lot of work now being done to try and prevent a second Cold War with the Russians. Sadly, in terms of nuclear nonproliferation, the relationships with the Russians are souring. However, there's still a lot of great, like I said, civil society work and NGO work that's being done.